community and for our neighbors in the surrounding community. And in sponsoring this series, Seattle University lives up to its ambition to be Seattle's university, the place where our city comes to think and deliberate about the most pressing issues of the day. And today we're pleased to host Congresswoman Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. This past November, Representative Gluesenkamp Perez won an impressive victory over Republican Joe Kemp in the third. We're a nonprofit, so I will. We're in the third Congressional District of Washington, a district that had elected a Republican in each of the previous 6 elections. The third district is located in the southwest corner of Washington State and includes the city of Vancouver. The daughter of a Mexican immigrant on her father's side and a 5th-generation Washingtonian on her mother's, Congresswoman Gluesenkamp Perez is not a professional politician. She famously owns and runs an auto shop with her spouse. As our politics have become more polarized along lines of educational attainment, working-class voters who had previously voted fairly consistently for Democrats have begun in recent years to trend more towards the Republican Party. And as a rising star in the Democratic Party, Representative Gluesenkamp Perez has urged her party to focus more of its efforts on the concerns of working-class voters with a goal of reversing that trend. Since she assumed office, she's been appointed to serve on 2 House committees, Agriculture and Small Business, and she's joined the Congressional Hispanic Caucus. She'll be interviewed this afternoon by Dr. Larry Hubble, a professor in the Institute for Public Service and the past director of that department, and Joni Balter, a multimedia journalist and a professional in residence here at Seattle University. It's now my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Hubble.
Thank you, President Peñalver. And I'd like to just also mention that this program is sponsored by the College of Arts and Sciences and also the Institute of Public Service. And I'd also like to say at the beginning that, despite the applause, our guests' views do not necessarily represent the views of Seattle University. So, Joni, will you take it?
Okay. We're ready to go, TV. 1, 2, 3. Good afternoon. Welcome to Seattle University, and welcome to our special guest, who's kind of lighting up Congress right now, U.S. Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez. Thank you so much for, I believe, Representative, trekking through the snow, the unpredicted snow, to get here today. So a lot of folks in the media, I think I've used the term myself, have described you as the opposite of a coastal elite. So in your own words, what parts of your background do you think give you sort of extra insight into the problems of working people?
Well, like you mentioned, my husband and I own an auto repair and a machine shop, and we are an independent shop, which is kind of a dying breed. We're not affiliated with any like auto manufacturers or a dealership. And so, you know, the average age of our cars that we serve are like 20 years old or, you know, a dozen years old. They're older vehicles, and you really are embedded with your community in a way when you're like a community auto shop. Like, you know who's getting a divorce, you know who can't afford their bill, like, you know who's getting a minivan because they're pregnant, you know, like, so, you know, and like the rash of catalytic converter thefts, you know, like all like just like eviscerating people's savings account, you know, and I think that is a really deep look into like the intimate parts of people's lives, you know, and it's kind of it's a nice cross section, and you know, and then just living in a rural community, that, you know, you have to rely on your neighbors. Like, people, like in the winter, like you drive around with the chainsaw in the back of your car because there might be a tree across the road, and like you need to, you know, I don't know if you can't like make your neighbors so mad they're not going to help, right? You got to get along with each other because there's not a store nearby. You might need to borrow gas. Like, there's things happen.
What happened to the Democrats? I mean, the Democrats used to really own the working class, and now it's increasingly been moving towards the Republicans.
Well, I mean, in the case of my family in particular, I mean, I guess I could say the spotted owl. You know, I mean, that was just, you know, it can't be overstated, like, how many people lost their jobs. And like, listen, like, I know it was a broad economic, right? Like, there was a lot of things that went into the collapse of the timber market. But I think that Democrats kind of put their head on the poster of some of those issues that it just really, you know, my mom grew up in Forks, Washington, which was really kind of the epicenter of that. And it just felt like a sort of callous disregard, and like, we're smarter, we know the science, and, you know, basically this attitude of like, do better, like, go to college, like, get a real job, you know, and people remember that. People remember that, and it cuts deep. Like, it was like humiliating, you know. So it's persistent.
Okay. Now, you're a first-termer, and you seem to get on two of the committees that you wanted to be on, which was agriculture and small business. How were you able to work that?
Yeah, that was quite the lobby because, you know, so the Farm Bill is like every 5 years, and it's considered one of the must-piece passes of legislation. And so suddenly everyone wants to be on ag every, you know, 5 years, every 3 terms. And so it did take a lot of lobbying to do that. And I think one of the useful pieces was for me, like, there are a lot of members of Congress that represent rural districts broadly, but they tend to live in the urban part of the rural district, or like in the city in the rural part, you know, in the rural district. So I think I am one of the members that actually lives in the rural part of a rural district. And like, you know, like, I get my water from a well, I get my internet from a radio tower, like those things.
At the end of 3 gravel roads, I was told.
Yeah, yeah. Right. And, you know, the price of gravel's going, right? So, I think that was a salient point. And I think, you know, one of the hardening things, or like encouraging things for me, is that, like, my colleagues in the House, like, they want to understand rural issues. Like, they want to hear from us. Like, I was invited to speak at one of the messaging committee meetings and be the, you know, they truly do want to understand, because, I mean, the writing's on the wall in many ways electorally. And also, I think some of the issues that we care about most as Democrats, like, you know, drug abuse, housing, you know, economic issues, like, those things are manifest in rural communities in a way that we need to understand and be relevant in. So I was able to sort of like leverage my background to get a good spot, and yeah, it was fortunate. I feel like, you know, I got ranking member position for the Small Business Committee on Rural Development, Energy, and Supply Chain, which, like, you couldn't make a better committee for me. So that was really fortunate.
I understand you also had some gripes with the SBA.
I do, yeah. So that's the story. So my husband and I actually had a terrible landlord, and we bought our building with a loan from the SBA. We're able to buy a separate building and move in. And I have an undergraduate degree in economics. It literally took me a year to fill out that application. You know, and you think about how many small business owners actually have the capacity to do that. Like, the regulatory hurdle, it just means that the dollars aren't going to who does, you know, might put them to the highest use, but to the people who can hire a consultant to get the grant or to get the loan. And we see that all over rural communities. It is so, you know, I was actually the part-time director for a Stevenson Downtown Association, which is a rural economic development kind of. And I remember filling out these grants from the state of Washington, trying to build a park, and going to the grant hearing, and I show up, and it's all consultants. The bigger cities have all hired people who are obviously better dressed than me. They have really nice graphics to sell their parks with. They have, like, great renderings, beautiful images, and they're a lot more successful at getting these grants. And it's just it's so frustrating to rural communities to feel like we're not on a level playing field. The regulatory hurdles, the administrative hurdles, are just too high for us to effectively, you know, tell our story.
You've talked a lot during the campaign and even since you've been in Washington about a right to repair bill. Can you explain to all of us what that is and what steps you're taking to get that through this term, I think?
Yeah, so I'm one of the co-sponsors on the Repair Act. But broadly, right to repair is something that we should all care about, not just people, mechanics, And the sort of genesis of right to repair is actually John Deere Tractor put a chip on their engines, and only the dealerships were authorized to unlock these engines, and it was in the terms of service contract. So an entire year, make, and model of one of the first years they did this. All these farmers didn't actually have the legal right to fix their own tractors or to take them to independent shops. And people that work in ag know that you only have a couple of days to cut hay when it's maximally nutritive to stock. It's like when the seed head is fully formed, but before it's fallen off the stalk. Mm-hmm. So it's a very tight timeline to have hay that's worth anything. And lo and behold, these tractors all, crap out at the same time. And there are not enough dealerships to get these tractors fixed, and millions of dollars of hay are lost. The price of beef goes up. Everything goes up. And farmers come out with their pitchforks, and they're just enraged that they don't have the legal right to fix their own stuff. And so right to repair laws sort of go back to where we assume as consumers that we have, the right to fix our own stuff. But that's being taken away from us. And it's not just tractors. Remember the first iPhones you could replace the battery on, and you can't do that anymore without voiding? And so it's consumer electronics, it's home medical equipment, things where it's I just need to replace a battery, or I just need to replace a gasket, and I can save $2,000 or $10,000, or, so it is hitting the middle class especially hard. I'm someone that has never bought a new car in my life, and I depend on a secondary market for used cars, that people have fixed and maintained them. And when we don't allow that work to happen, we eviscerate the secondary market. Things that should be reusable and move through a couple different owners instead become disposable, and they go to the landfill. And so environmentalists should also be enraged about this, because it's terrible for the environment, it's terrible for the middle class. I think it's terrible for our character as Americans, because I really believe part of our national identity is that we are a country where we believe in fixing things, and we are we have this DIY ethos that you don't see in a lot of other countries. We'll paint our own walls, we'll change our own brakes, we'll do stuff that's a little more rare in other places. And when we take away the right to fix stuff, that sort of knowledge gets passed down in families, right? You have to learn from
throwaway society,
right?
Throw it out,
right? And if you skip a generation, you lose the ability. The next generation is just hosed in terms of knowing how to check their oil and how to do these things. So it sounds like a niche issue, but I argue that this is actually a pivotal piece of our culture and our environment.
And so by high profiling it yourself, do you think that in this term you'll be able to get somewhere? Well,
it's tricky. There are different pieces of legislation that are more narrowly or more broadly focused. And so I think that it's possible we will get parts of it done, but it's going to take a long time. Well, I think it's going to take a little bit of a longer horizon to get to the heart of the issue. And finding which pieces we can get through the House and the Senate, and finding those coalitions. And it's always a challenge, because it's we can get the ag community on board for one thing, so do we leverage that when and try to loop in the home medical equipment also with that, or do we go more narrow and quicker? It's all about building coalitions.
Given your great affinity for the working class and the middle class, how does that translate in terms of public policy, aside from sounds like your skepticism about the Endangered Species Act?
So I think tax policy really matters, a clarity and ease of tax policy and a fair, equitable system. That's one of the reasons that I voted against, they were essentially defunding the IRS. Like, right now, we have a hugely underfunded IRS, and what they do when they have an underfunded staff is they go after the easiest tax returns. The simplest tax returns are typically ones that have earned income tax credit, so people that work for a living. When you're talking about a billionaire who's got offshore accounts and 3 different corporate, or 5 different corporations and all kinds, those much more complex tax returns have a much lower rate of being audited. And so, the idea is that by having more IRS agents, we'll have the manpower to go after the fraud we know is happening, especially in the higher income brackets. And, the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan, it's just economists, their estimate was that by more adequately funding the IRS, we would reduce the national deficit by $114 million over 10 years. Like, that's nothing to sneeze at, right? Like, this is
real money.
This is real money, and it's good policy.
I mean, $1 billion, 114 billion, or million.
I think it depends on the horizon. Yeah.
So you've been quoted several times criticizing your own Democratic Party. Can you just elaborate on a few details of that? Like, so what are some of the biggest mistakes you think the Democrats make?
Yeah, I mean, I think Democrats can be really obsessed with being right all the time, and they're sort of missing the point. It's more important that people know that you hear them and that you are understanding what they're talking about. You are understanding their perspective. Like, I think about, right, there's the famous quote, there's like lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? And so we get very obsessed with like, oh, well, this study says this. And as somebody that studied economics in undergrad, I know that the way that you design the study really can predetermine the outcome of a study. And so it matters what horizon of things we're talking about. Like particularly in timber policy, it's like we are not even meeting our own, like, the Forest Service is like, I think we're pulling 30% of the board feet off the woods that we say we should be pulling, that they say they should be pulling. And instead we're importing wood from places that have much lower environmental standards than we do. And so when you think about the global carbon cost of what we're doing, like, there needs to be a balance. And when you think about wildfire, you think about the carbon emissions of massive wildfires. We need a bigger picture. And people are bringing up valid points that deserve to be brought into the conversation. So, I mean, those are some of the things I think about. Maybe that's a little bit more of a narrow answer than you're asking.
No. It fits into kind of some of the things I've read and some of the things I'm thinking about. And I also saw a quote from you talking about sometimes the Democrats will focus on the poorest of the poor. But then when they go into a community, and you described this in one of the pieces I read, that they end up not answering the questions of folks working class, middle class.
I mean, it is a real problem that our teachers can't afford to buy houses. I mean, home ownership really matters across the spectrum. And like, we'll just talk about very low income housing a lot and just like really hammer on housing as a human right. And it's like, yes, that is true. But when we're not addressing the fact that like no one in my generation is able to get their foot in the door of the housing market, we're kind of missing the forest for the trees. Like, there is a really big problem going on. And like, when we focus on just the worst of the worst, it's also alienating because nobody thinks of themselves as, nobody wants to think of themselves as like the least resource person, and it just feels like we're, the middle class, I think, often feels like we're being talked past, or you sort of have to like pretend like things are worse for you than they are to be relevant to the conversation or something like, it's hard for people to feel included in or relevant in a lot of these policies.
You've said in multiple forums that you're a strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and I'm wondering whether you would like to see further restrictions on the purchase or use of guns.
Yeah, I mean, that's another issue where, like, rural, it just is really different for rural communities. You know, and you know, I say that as somebody like, my son's going to go to public school, you know, and I really think about that, you know, and I and my husband both really thought about, like, when you run for public office, like, your chances of being shot are pretty high. And, like, you know, we've gotten threats, you know, I mean, it's, you know, gun violence is real and relevant to me. But I also think that the Second Amendment is part of the Constitution. And, you know, in terms of additional restrictions, like, I think one thing I think about is, like, increasing the age of purchasing assault weapons to 21, or what are known as assault weapons, commonly called assault weapons, to 21. I think that is something that makes sense.
Should more restrictions be put on assault weapons besides the age?
Yeah, I think the age is the first. You know, and that is the thing that makes sense. You know, I think that a lot of the issues are, you know, mental health is a big part of the picture, and a lack of access to, like, career trajectories that, like, make sense for you. I think that, you know, I actually think that eviscerating career and technical education in our public schools is probably part of the problem, honestly. I know a lot of people, you know, a lot of my friends stayed in school because they liked shop class. You know, and you start pulling those things out, you start telling people that if you don't go to college, you did something wrong with your life, or you're not very smart. Like, that is very damaging. And I think has had long-term repercussions in a lot of the problems we're seeing today. Like, I'm part of the generation where, like, all of our shop classes, like, got turned into computer programming classes. And, like, I think that was just a huge mistake. Like, we have to return the prestige to the trades broadly. Like, in Germany, for instance, they recognize that, like, kids are gifted in mechanical aptitude or kinetic brilliance. And, you know, they're at like third or fourth grade, you know, they'll say, hey, like, your kid has a talent. You might want to steward this. You might want to go in that direction. And we have no problem doing that for reading or math for our very young kids, but we don't acknowledge the full spectrum of gifts that kids can be born with. And instead, we've made it something that's, you know, embarrassing. And so I think that this is one of the cultural shifts, getting back to the place where we respect work, where we respect the trades. That's something that's going to do that will have a profound, I think, impact on our mental health, on a lot of these societal issues that we're seeing.
Sort of rolling through the issues here, you support abortion rights. Are there any limits that you think government should place on abortion rights?
No, like, that's the thing, is, like, when you start having the government make laws about who gets what, like, I don't want a 20-year-old staffer bro telling me when I can get a medical procedure and when I can't. And that's what ends up happening. Like, even if you've been pregnant, you have a very narrow spectrum of how much can go wrong, how quickly, and at what point. And we are seeing now with, you know, Roe versus Wade falling, like, we are seeing really horrific stories play out all across the country. And the government should not have a role in deciding who gets what medical attention when.
During the campaign, the primary campaign, you noted in an ad that your predecessor, former Representative Jamie Herrera Butler, quote, rewarded the special interests and ignored us. Yet you made a point of hiring several members of her staff. Why'd you do that?
Well, I think that it's important to have a staff that is reflective of the district. And also, these are hugely talented people that know, you know, they know the issues. And I think it's actually really healthy. Like, I often challenge people. It's like, how many Republicans are you friends with? How many Democrats are you friends with? Like, you should have a bipartisan sphere of influence around you. You know, like, if your ideas are right, like, you should let them be challenged. and you should have, right, as iron sharpens iron, so man sharpens man. Like, you should have a healthy debate, and so it's important to, I think, build a bipartisan staff and maintain that.
Sort of with that in mind, I read a story where you described that you sometimes see your colleagues walking around with an actual list of party recommendations for how to vote on upcoming legislation, and you don't do that. So I wonder what's been the reaction to that. Are party purists annoyed at you? Or are they intrigued? Or
it can be, it can be kind of harrowing. Like taking votes that aren't going to be popular. It is a little bit alienating, but it's. And you have to weigh the cost of doing it. Like there's a cost of not voting the party line.
But I mean, you read what they're recommending.
Oh, yeah.
It's not like, I'm not interested, but then you know what I mean. But it's just, I wonder if they're annoyed at you at this point.
It probably depends on the member whether or not they're annoyed at me. It depends on their perspective or their district that they're from. I mean, it's so funny because some of them they're just like, oh, I would be primaried. Like that's the, things that everybody just comes from such different districts. And if you only hang out with people that come from districts like you, that can, I think, really narrow your perspective on what the world looks like.
You opted not to join some of the House Democratic caucuses, specifically the progressives and the moderates in the new Democratic coalition. Why'd you make that decision?
Yeah, I actually haven't joined any ideologically aligned caucuses just because I don't feel like there's one that fits. I don't fit neatly into one or the other.
And in fairness, I mean, you were under some pressure since the moderates and the progressives either are or were led by fellow members of the Washington delegation.
Right. They're friends that lead these, and so. And it's not at all a slight on them. And I'm not saying I won't ever join, but I think, especially as a new freshman member, really taking my time and finding my own path and my own, my own set of people that I'm kind of looking to. I think I want to be really careful in how I sort of build my tribe, my people.
I want to move along to the bridge over the Columbia River. Yeah. We've been talking about this for such a long time. What is your position? Replacement, repair, light rail?
Yeah, I mean the best bridge is the bridge that gets built. Like, if I have my baby in the car, I do not drive across there's actually two bridges right in parallel. One of them is from like Eisenhower, and there's one that's it just celebrated its 106th birthday. So that's the one going south into Portland. So I don't drive on that one.
Time to buy a cake, right?
Yeah, yeah. So we take the 205 otherwise. So it is, and one of the interesting things is like people think that it's free to maintain old infrastructure. It's expensive. Like the 205, I think they spend like $70K a year maintaining and operating the 205.
Would you describe what the 205?
Oh, the 205 is like the parallel highway further south.
Okay.
And right, it's like maintaining and operating the I-5 bridge is like $1.2 million a year, and that's just kind of a sunk cost. And I know that we're talking about specifically the I-5 project, but that goes for so much of our infrastructure. Like, we are choosing the most expensive option for our infrastructure in America, which is just letting stuff decay.
So replacement.
Oh, yeah.
Replacement.
Yes, we need to replace it.
And what about light rail, and what about tolling and all of that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of those are like, it is kind of a bad idea, I think, for the federal level to get to, like, I want the bridge this color. Like, I want to get the most federal dollars I can to get that bridge done as fast as we can with Southwest Washington Labor and with American-made steel. Like, those are the priorities that I'm thinking about. And, if they need light rail, if they need tolling, like, those are going to be a little more local decisions. My job is to, get the money here.
And what's the likelihood that would actually make any progress during your 2-year term?
I don't think right now. I think they're talking 2025 is the estimated start date. But those funding dollars need to start lining
Wouldn't
up
they need to
now.
be secured during this term?
Right.
Yeah.
Many of them.
And likelihood? Thoughts about that?
So it depends on how they, it is, I think that there is more funding available if they choose to have a bridge designed with light rail or that's light rail ready. Like, those projects just are more competitive for national funding.
And also just for the future of climate change.
And that's why they're more competitive. That's why they have a higher chance of success.
You've indicated a willingness to work on both sides of the aisle for legislation. How do you decide which members you can trust enough to work on a bill together?
Well, actually, running an auto shop is very similar too. Because you have
the
to.
hood.
Well, yeah, right. You have a customer come in, and if I don't know them, if they're a new customer, I'm trying to, because I'll do $1,200 of work for them, and then I have to decide if they're gonna take advantage of me or not. We've had customers say I want a 40% discount, or I'm going to give you a bad Google review. That happens all the time, and so you have to develop a strong read on people. That's how we pay our mortgage, is by being good at judging people, and so I think that's been a positive, But the other thing is if I only work with people that I really like I'm not gonna it's gonna be a narrow team, right? So we have to build a broad coalition to get things done.
Well, I have a question about that. Are there any? It's great that you're talking about and working across the aisle. A lot more people need to do that. But are there any members of Congress who are too far right to kind of trust? And not to stir up too much trouble here, but what about a national divorce? Red states and blue states.
Oh, that is just what that is. That is not serious policy. That is fundraising.
Oh.
That is and I mean, I think one of the sort of disturbing or interesting things about being in Congress is seeing how people actually are much more moderate when the TV cameras aren't on. It is effective fundraising to say stuff like that.
Well, because we're talking about it. And,
right.
Yeah. We probably have others.
Raises the profile. You don't get famous by being normal. But I voted on a amendment that Lauren Boebert put forward. If it's a good idea, I'm going to support it. Yeah. It doesn't, crazy people can have good ideas sometimes.
Duly noted. Duly noted.
As a first-term member of Congress, what do you expect to be able to accomplish? And are your options even more limited, especially given the fact that the majority of the House are now Republicans?
Yeah, it is interesting. We don't have a lot of history to judge either leadership off of. There isn't that. Nancy Pelosi was in forever, right? We had a long period of time to say this is how she operates. We don't have that with Jeffries and Clark or McCarthy and Scalise. We don't, and so we're still seeing. One bright flash of hope is one of my amendments on a bill was one of 5 that were ruled in order, and so it was surprising that they'd let a Democrat bill or amendment make it to the floor. That was encouraging. That said, legislation moves on geologic time. It is not small business. It is a much more difficult process to build those coalitions. So I think it's likely that I will be more effective, or more of the good that I can do will come through ways other than legislation. It's going to take time. I think that I have already been effective in agenda setting and sort of talking about like bringing issues to attention and just talking with other members about issues that are important and like explaining to other members like the difference between assembly and manufacturing. Those things, like those conversations are, I think, will have a ripple effect.
And you see yourself being on both the committees, both agriculture and small business for the long term?
They are great committees for me. Yeah, I'm very optimistic that those are places I'll be able to be in for hopefully a long while. Yeah.
I'm not sure if this is the right moment for this question, but can you tell us about the axe throwing? How did you get into this recreational activity? And you even have a victory to tell us about, right?
Oh yeah. No, I think I'm like the fourth place champion, one of the fourth place champions in Skamania County for axe throwing.
Does it have like a runner's high and stuff like that?
So we have a timber carnival every year, and a lot of Morton has like the loggers do like there's a lot of timber carnivals around the state, and axe throwing is you see the timber carnival and they're fun. It's just really meaningful to get to like throw your uncle's axe, or your great uncle's axe, or it's just it's something.
Did they use it for that too?
Yeah.
Axe throwing? Okay.
Yeah, I mean,
in addition to other things.
Yeah, so it's a double-headed axe, and it's something that you would use for like clearing when you're going out and estimating how many board feet are in a given.
Oh.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I'm the second place choker setter though. That's where I really shine.
Wait! Your staff said you came in third in axe throwing at the Skamania Timber Carnival.
I don't know if it was third or fourth. I'll look. I did get $5.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
Well,
you received only 50.1% of the vote in the general election. Your opponent, as many people in the audience know, was a member of the far right, which probably turned off some moderate voters and independent voters. How can you continue to gain the support of enough moderate Republicans and independents to win again in 2024?
Yeah, I am the only freshman in Congress that flipped a Trump +5 district. Like, I flipped the biggest margin district. And I think flipping is the term that people use a lot. I don't know how accurate it is because I don't ultimately, like, when you lift up the hood, like, I don't think it was really about, people did not change their views on things significantly. I think I'm just talking about issues that matter more to more people. And they're not the things that you see broadly, broadcast on Twitter or, network television. But there are things that people are really passionate about. And I think that because of who I am, like I didn't run an auto shop because I wanted to run for Congress. Like, run an auto shop because I like fixing things and, love being
cool
a small
metaphor.
business. Yeah, yeah, that is true. Yeah, it lends itself to a lot of puns, most of which we do not use. But and so I think it's
like if it's
relevant.
broken, fix it.
Yeah, well, yeah, keeping the wheels on. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But a lot of I think generally the system of politics where like you run for and also like, by the way, run for school board. I'm here to tell, like, people need to like run for these seats. But the system where you try to like work you do these things so that you can get to higher office, and you sit on these boards so you can I think that system is bankrupt. Like, I don't think that's what most Americans want in their electeds. Like, I think they want people that live normal lives, that are living the same lives they are, that are trying to pay the mortgage, that are trying to get an SBA loan, that are on 8 waiting lists for daycare. Like, that stuff resonates, and it's, I think, part of how we are going to build a Congress that looks more like America. I mean, so you asked about 2024, and, Joe Kent is running again. He announced that on the Steve Bannon show. And I think there's a really sort of calcified, there's a very hard base of support that persists for him, that does not believe that, like, there are so many conspiracy theories about me and how I won and where I came from, and, just it goes on and on and on. And those folks were really bought into that. And I think that in this district, like, it's a very unique, or it's a very interesting mix of, like, enough really hard, deep, right of right folks that it's enough to carry people like Joe Kent through the primary.
Now, you could have Joe Kent as an opponent in 2024, but you might have a more moderate candidate like Jamie Herrera Butler. Who would you consider the tougher opponent?
That's a good question. I mean, like I said, like, I think that the sort of brand of established politician is not what people are excited about right now. And I think that will persist regardless of who I run against. And I'm hopeful that, my time in Congress, like, if I only get 2 years, like, I'm working my tail off to make sure that was a powerful 2 years and we got to change things about how the system works, who gets listened to, what our priorities are. And so, we're working hard to be relevant and be effective partners for folks.
If you don't mind me telling the audience your age, you're 34 years old.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Is your age a benefit or is it a drawback?
I don't know how, like, it is an insane schedule. Like, running a small business is a 24/7 job. Like, being in Congress can feel like 2 24/7 jobs. Like, it's a lot. And so, I think that it's definitely an asset to have more stamina and I mean, I guess folks replace that with more experience. That's ideally what happens. I think there's probably benefits to both. Yeah.
So I feel a little uncomfortable bringing up attire when talking with a female politician. However, you were recently part of the story in the New York Times about Senator John Fetterman from Pennsylvania. And, he's known for wearing shorts and hoodies. But you had an encounter with him. You spoke to him. I appreciate it if you could tell our audience about that encounter and sort of more why you feel an affinity with the senator from Pennsylvania.
Yeah, so there was a reception for newly elected members of Congress, which is, that's the House and the Senate. And so I was wearing, my Carhartt jacket and jeans, and because I think that it's important, to, like, be who you are, right? And I think I'm proud of working in the trades, and I think that it, that representation matters, and so I just am who I am. So I went to this reception, and Fetterman's there, and he stands out. He looks.
He's a little tall, right?
He's tall. He's tall, and he also is just, he's got a very unique profile, and so I saw him, and I was like, oh, that's Senator Fetterman, and I hadn't seen him before, so I walked up and introduced myself, and took him a minute, and he kind of looked at what I was wearing, and he was like, why does she get to wear jeans? So I don't know, maybe we'll see him in a hoodie going forward. I hope so. If that sparks joy for him, he should do it, you know.
But do you feel a connection, in your sort of public profile persona with him?
I think that we have a lot of the same issues matter to us both. Yeah.
Okay, let's switch to a completely different area. That's foreign policy. Today is the one-year anniversary of Russia's war against Ukraine. Well, actually, it's the second term or the second wave of the invasion, because they actually took over Crimea more than 7 years ago. But what's your position on this war? Do you think in the long run that American resolve could fade in terms of its support for Ukraine?
I don't think America, Well, I think this is one of the interesting things about this engagement is, like, they have been very transparent and they broadcast Putin's goals. Like, they were telling us for weeks in advance, like, they're going to invade Ukraine. And, like, lo and behold, they invade Ukraine, and Putin does. And now they're showing Putin wants to take over Belarus. Putin wants to take over Moldova. Like, we should take them seriously. And maybe if we had taken them seriously when they invaded Crimea in 2014, we wouldn't be here. And so I think a lot of people are, very committed to protecting these democratically elected, these countries that support democracy, and increasingly concerned about what's going on with Russia and the Wagner Group. And, I mean, it is very ugly stuff. And I think the cost of not acting, right, is pretty high. Because if Ukraine falls, there goes Belarus, there goes Moldova, there goes Poland. Like, where's that going to end?
Some Republicans seem to be less than enthusiastic about supporting Ukraine in the war. Do you think this will continue to be a bipartisan support for Ukraine in the Congress?
Yeah, I think they're relatively divided over that. And I think that my sense is the appetite for sending troops is never going to, that's not happening. But I think broadly, overall, a strong majority of us are supporting continued military support.
Well, I would just ask you, what have you heard in your own district, like at a town hall or something? Is the resolve still there, or what do you?
Oh yeah.
What do you...
I mean, we actually have quite a few Ukrainians, for one thing. Mm-hmm. We have a lot of people that have left Russia also who have strong feelings about this also, and so there is definitely continued support.
Do you see this war as strengthening or weakening NATO, in the sense that, after all, NATO members have provided lots of arms to the Ukrainians?
I mean, I think NATO is more unified than it's been in a long time, and very relevant, and yeah.
So I want to go back to the campaign just for a second. Just the way this rolled out, and how you surprised so many people. Were you really prepared to actually win? Like, there were experts at the time,
oh yeah,
pollsters saying you had like a 2% chance to pull this off.
Yeah.
Did you really get your brain around that you could win?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would not have put my life in a blender if I didn't think I could win. Like,
actual blender.
Yeah. No, I knew. I mean, I know my district. Like, I knew that Jamie was very vulnerable, and I knew that the support for Joe was, like, very deep, but very narrow. By which I mean, like, there are very ardent supporters, but not enough, not a critical mass of them. Like, normal people don't want to ban all immigration for 20 years or whatever he was talking about. I mean, that's crazy pants. And so I and my husband, initially was, like, very reluctant to, because it's a family decision. It just is. And he was very reluctant in the beginning. And I was like, what? Why? Like, because he's the kind of man who, like, he really believes me. Like, he was like, if she runs, she's going to win. So his commitment, and I think we actually just hit a year. It was like a year ago that we rolled out our campaign. It was like a year and 4 days or something like that. So, it was something that I knew it was going to take a lot of work. I knew it was going to take things falling in, the right things falling into place. But, yeah.
Members of Congress, I understand, have received briefings on the spy balloons, and I wonder if you can give us any scoop here about either the large sky balloon or the other smaller
including the
sky
science
balloons.
project, right?
Yeah, I mean, those briefings are, like, classified, but I think that one thing that has been in the media and remains true is that by not shooting them down when they were, you can't recovering something out of the Bering Sea is like very, very difficult compared to like the coast of South Carolina. Very, very different. And so we learned a lot by recovering it. And we also learned a lot by seeing where it was programmed to go, what their interests are. Like the way that I kind of think about it is like if you see your weird neighbor like creeping around your property, sometimes it's worth like what are they looking at, right? You don't always
Did
want
this
to go
happen,
out
or you're just this is yeah.
guns blazing. That's not always the strategic choice.
By waiting to shoot it off the Carolina coast, were they still able to recover the necessary
Oh yeah, it was
information?
basically recovered intact as far as most of it was recovered.
So you think that some of the Republican criticism was unfounded?
Well,
Because they were saying it should have been shut down earlier.
Well, and I think it's not even like the RD thing. It's like people have this idea that no one lives in Montana. Like people live in Montana, and like the thing was like 3 school buses wide. Like it was massive, and so the whole goal of our security is to keep Americans safe. And so you have 3 school buses falling out of the sky. That is actually I think one of the examples of the way that people just don't have a clear picture of what rural America really is.
In President Joe Biden's State of the Union message, he seemed to be talking a lot like you do sometimes, talking to working class folks who went to college or not. Did you hear anything about folks saying, wow, like that they were surprised or that they didn't like the way he was speaking? Did he connect with voters in your district?
Yeah, that was a wild. So I actually brought my State of the Union guest was the high school shop teacher from Kalama High School, Corey Torpa, who is amazing. He has got a phenomenal. His program, they are building a house from the ground up, and then they sell the house at auction, and the proceeds go back into the program. Like it is a phenomenal program. He's just a very smart, very passionate guy. And I was like, it felt like Biden's speech was pretty well talking to the issues that matter to us.
Do you think Joe Biden should run again? Sorry to.
Well, I mean, honestly, I'm thinking more about my race than his race. So, yeah, I'll let him make that decision.
Well, let me ask it another way. Would having him on the top of the ticket, do you think it would help you?
I don't know. I mean, I think that there's, you work with what you're dealt, but I don't know. And I don't know what the sort of cost of a ugly primary would be either, right?
And being in a Republican district, is it a bit more of a liability running in a presidential year?
I honestly, the things that I talk about are, generally speaking, they are not things that Biden's talking about. They're not, the State of the Union was kind of surprising, but they're not things that other national Democrats tend to be talking about. And so it almost feels like I'm sort of doing my own thing. The national agenda, that matters, but if I'm talking about sort of culture war issues, I'm not relevant. I'm not doing my job, because those are things that that narrative is shaped around fundraising. It's not the things that make people's lives better. It's not making Social Security solvent. It's not fixing the tax code. It's not getting our schools up, where we need them are, so our teachers are able to buy houses. Those are not the things that end up in political commercials.
Well, just flipping that. So, what kind of issues would you emphasize in order to encourage fundraising for your own candidacy?
Oh, for me? I guess I don't. In terms of issues that, what do I fundraise off of? I think the goodwill of people that think I'm telling them the truth, that think that, and I think that's what is kind of how I have stamina, is just like being myself and talking about the things that matter to me. And it's been a very lucky coincidence that the things that impact my life are things that are impacting other people's lives too. Like, like we had our shop windows broken 4 times this year. Like those things, like they matter to people because they are, or I guess 2022. But they're the things that, are important to, the middle, the broad middle.
Well, maybe talking about things like our shop windows broken 4 times connects with people who are thinking, that public safety isn't exactly rocking right now in many communities. So I imagine folks talked to you about that and said that means something to them.
Yeah.
Now, so what would your role be in that as part of the federal government?
Well, one of the problems is that like federal dollars are almost exclusively directed towards capital projects or like capital expenses and not operating expenses, especially for the police. So like, I don't know anybody who's left the police department because they didn't have night vision goggles. They leave because the starting wage is like $35,000 a year right now across America. Like it is like, it's a joke, and so that's the role that I think the federal government, and like I was talking to the sheriff of Thurston County, Derek, forgetting his last name, and he was like, we're getting body cameras and night vision goggles like thrown at us. Like I started putting body cameras on the dogs, because, like no joke, like because and meanwhile we have all these vacancies. They can't staff up, and so their folks are like stressed out, and they're not, they don't have the time for the training, and they don't, it's just, it's bad, it's bad business,
So there has to be probably more coordination between the capital items that the federal government can help with, and then the local decisions that are being made on staffing.
Well, and it's not even just local decisions. Like they are fighting tooth and nail. Like they are like so many counties and so many cities are like, they are just like, you'll get trained in Thurston County and then you'll get hired by King County, or it's a real competition, and people, they're not able to hang on to talent, especially in smaller communities or the county level. But my argument is like, it's not even necessarily about coordination. It's about the kinds of things that that the feds want to fund.
But do you think some of the messages, this is, really about locals, but do you think some of the messages about policing from Democrats have made the problem worse?
Yeah. I mean, it is really tough. Like if you, don't feel respected, you don't have the social capital or respect, and you don't have the money, right? Then it's really hard to feel like this is somewhere that you want to stay, a career path that you want to stay in. And I think that's when we start like losing more talent and losing good people, and that makes it really hard. So yeah, I think that there absolutely are problems, but underfunding isn't making those problems better.
Fair enough. So I'm looking at the clock and some of the promises that I made to your staff. And so I'm going to say that we're out of time, and I want to thank you so much, Representative Gluesenkamp Perez, for giving us all this time. And I want to thank the audiences, and there are 3 of them. Thank you so much for the time, and thanks for watching.